All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Viz 80, and welcome to all the guests that are here tonight to our Longenecker-Roth Artist in Residence. I am going to keep my part brief, but I just want to remind everybody to please consider applying for the Russell Grant. That deadline is coming up soon, and it's a great opportunity to get some free money from UCSD. So I hope you will apply. And for those of you in my class, the information's on Canvas, but you can go to the VizArts website and look under grants and scholarships, and you'll find it. It's called the Russell Grant. Okay, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Professor Janelle Iglesias. So welcome, Janelle.
Hi, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to the UCSD Department of Visual Arts 2025 Longenecker-Roth Artist in Residence Lecture. I'm here to tell you a little bit about Martha. Martha Longenecker-Roth was an artist who worked in ceramics and design. She was a professor of art at San Diego State University and the founder of the Mingei Art Museum in San Diego's Balboa Park. She was committed to art for the many rather than for the few, and to breaking down the barriers between fine arts, craft, and folk art. The Longenecker-Roth Artist in Residence Endowment was established in 2016 to extend Martha's legacy as an artist and as an educator. In the spirit of her historic impact on the visual arts in both local and global communities, this endowment to the Visual Arts Department enables us to annually bring to campus an artist of national and international stature with the aim of inspiring our students to broaden the scope, appeal, and range of their art practices, as well as inciting exchange with the faculty, the campus community, local artists, students, and audiences. This endowment was made possible due to the generosity of our friend Anna Smythe and the support of Christina Della Coletta, Dean of the Arts and Humanities here at UCSD, both of whom we thank very much for this unique opportunity. I also want to thank the LAIR committee, my co-chair, Monique Van Genderen, Lorena Mostajo, and Memo Atkin for their contributions as well. Many thanks to our amazing staff, especially Lucas, Kevin, Justin, Paolo, Adrian, Nick. I know I'm missing somebody, and I'm sorry if I did, for their immense support in making all of this possible. We also wanted to invite you to Iris's Open Studio. That'll be happening at the end of next month, November 21st. It's a Friday, from 12 to 2 over at the Visual Arts Facility main gallery. In recent years, we've paired our artist in residence with a graduate student as a MFA LAIR fellow. And I'm happy to pass the mic to our 2025 MFA fellow, Aambr Newsome, who will introduce our 7th Longenecker-Roth Artist in Residence, Iris Yirei Hugh.
Hello, greetings everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Aambr Newsome. I am the Longenecker-Roth Fellow, and I'm also a third-year candidate here in the MFA Visual Arts program. I'm also very pleased and happy to share some information with you about Iris. Iris is a multidisciplinary journey-based artist from Los Angeles whose work crosses paths with paintings, installation, intercultural collaborations, and writing and public art. She roots her art practice in processes of material and spiritual transformation, as evidenced in labor-intensive pieces and installations that explore the subterranean realms of grief and loss, cycles of life and death, the earthly and the otherworldly, and the infinitely evolving self. Central to her practice is working across territories and peoples through which she investigates how geography, kinship, and the sacred are reflected in cultural technologies and ecological practices. A lifelong learner, she has undertaken rigorous study of ceramics, weaving, and paper making by being in community with culture bearers and experts, and proposes that the preservation of craft is integral to bridging cultural, geographic, and generational divides. So, if you can help me in welcoming Iris Yirei Hugh as the 2025 Longenecker-Roth Artist in Residence. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Ooh. Okay. All right. Can you hear me still? Okay. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you, Aambr, thank you, Janelle, Monique, Amy, Memo, Lorena, for being so supportive and so welcoming to me while I've been here. It's just been so great. It's been such a great residency. I'm here every day at VAF, working away, doing different things. And it's nice to be in San Diego and spend some time here where the weather is just so perfect every day. So I want to keep track of time here. Okay, so I sort of tailored this talk in hopes of kind of casting a wide net here. I know we have a lot of different audiences, but yeah, so hopefully we can all sort of follow along, and hopefully I can inspire you. So some of the MFA students might have seen me around VAF doing large amounts of dyeing. And so I wanted to start with this image to sort of kind of ground us in space. And this is the sort of different types of blue indigo dye that I've been working on for a piece that I'll get to at the end of this talk. So I thought to start with indigo here because indigo is something that so many cultures, geographies, places share. And my practice, what I'm interested in as an artist and as a human being is how can we get more connected? How can we get more intimate with one another? And I think one of the ways in which to do that is to look at craft practices, different cultural practices around that are holistic in their ways of working with the environment, working with the material, working with community, working with knowledge transmission, and working with spiritual. So indigo is one of these powerful substances for me that sort of captures all of that. And as you know, or may not know, I shouldn't assume what you know or not, indigo is also something that has been so captivating and mystical and has really held together many communities for a long time. And it has also really severed a lot of communities throughout our American history, for example. So just keep that in mind as sort of the kind of conceptual and historical groundwork that I wanted to lay for this particular material that I work with. And so this is still at VAF. So the way I do indigo is the organic way. And I've traveled to different parts of the world to observe and learn how different cultures keep their indigo. And the way indigo dye works is that indigo itself is not soluble in water, so you have to reduce it to make it soluble. So usually you need a reduction agent, and you need something such as like fructose sugar. In different communities, people use things like bananas, mangoes. Another reduction agent could be like rice wine. You know, different communities use what is available to them. And so these are some pictures that I took in my travels. The one on the left is a natural indigo vat from a Miao village in Guizhou, China, which is southern China. And this image to me is so important to me in the sense that when I encountered this, I was sort of traveling as a tourist to do some research as well within these sort of indigenous Chinese villages, and sort of get to know my own lost heritage. And I went with my father in 2018, and this was in preparation for a show that was ultimately at the John Michael Kohler Arts Center in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, where in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and in Milwaukee, there is a significant Hmong population, refugees that resettled in the Midwest. And the Miao and the Hmong are related, but the Hmong are sort of identified as such as people who were able to migrate out of China, and went into Southeast Asia. And so a lot of the refugee population that was resettled in Fresno and Sacramento and Long Beach and in parts of Minnesota and parts of Wisconsin were, from Thailand, from Laos, from Vietnam. But anyways, this indigo vat, I stumbled upon this woman who invited me into her house to see how she ferments indigo. And it was just this tub in a basement of just trash, recyclables, chickens, chicken poop, like every, things that would, kind of, you would think of as like sort of filthy. But yet there was just this like life-breathing, abundant life source that was just there. And it gives, and for the Hmong people, like, indigo is such an important grounding part of their identity, in their creation stories, in their daily wear, it's a central tenet in the culture. Yet it was existing amongst all this, what we think of as trash. And so I was really into this idea of indigo being so closely in relation to this idea of composting, of this idea of a life cycle, a life and death cycle that's constantly giving and devouring, giving and devouring. And then the second image is, a series of different variation of, or depth of indigo dye in Teotitlán del Valle in Oaxaca, where I stayed for a few weeks in 2018, and I was at this amazing family's home. Porfirio Gutierrez is probably a very prominent name to some of you, but his family has a workshop in Teotitlán del Valle where they have been, they've been natural dyers, weavers for generations. And Teotitlán is a town that is, a weaving, textile-centric town. And so I went there and lived with them, lived with the family, and observed and learned from them. And what I realized was to make color, to make something like indigo, to make something like a natural pigment, it takes so much specificity of the environment. It takes the weather patterns, it takes people's capacities, it takes tending to the sheep, there's so many variables that go into making color. And I felt that was so alive. It was such a different and transformative experience for me in that, when I need a color, I'll just go to Blick. Well, I don't go to Blick. I go to a local art store. But I'll go to a local art store and just pick the color and purchase it. But in this way of learning how to make color, it just felt so much more relational and so much more intimate. And you have to care and know about the things that kind of come, the things and the people and the conditions that come into producing something. So I've written about indigo. This is an excerpt that I wanted to read to you that was published in Aambr Journal in 2020 or 2021. If you don't know what that is, it is one of the oldest Asian American journals dedicated to Asian American studies, and I believe it is archived at UCLA. I don't know exactly who publishes it, but it's a very important journal to ethnic studies, to Asian American studies. So I'll go ahead and read this. Once fermented, a soluble dye vat is created wherein the mother indigo flowers, and to flower, the experienced dyer removes oxygen from the liquid with a reduction agent such as sugar. Blue's bitterness requires some sweetness after all. The vat, depending on the method, will be murky and green, and a substrate submerged under the liquid transforms only in the presence of air. The more times you dip, the denser the blue. It is a skill that requires a spiritual and rigorous undertaking. I see the dye vat as the ancestral underworld, containing a myriad of stories and lifetimes I will never know. It is a portal into a magical world in which tribes, clans, and villages are brought together through material and song by this wondrous blue substance. It is also a portal into a nefarious world in which people were severed from their homelands and corralled into the hands of slavery, war, and execution. The plump, frothy, and blue flower that glides the coppery green surface is a beauty so regal. I puncture the primordial mother with my fingers and am devoured by the longing of loss. The vat, an interlocking net of bubbling connections, sings to me a different blue each time. The chemical revolution of the 19th century crystallized the distinction between natural, organic, and synthetic. Fructose sugar, pickling lime, and indigo are what I use to dye. I get my ingredients packaged and shipped to me from a natural dye store in Washington State. With crystallized substances, I remake the blues that my grandmother cannot sing. The natural way of indigo was lost in my family even before my grandmother came into being. I learned of the Meow Blues, songs passed down from elders of dreams about a homeland lifetimes away, through the lyricism of a Hmong poet. From a podcast, her voice reminds me of our distantly related grief and reifies the poetry of the impossible, where abstraction and improvisation find themselves in our longing to grow near the womb of the primordial mother. Upon their dispossession over the course of millennia, proximity to redemption is sacred and to be remade. Our indigo mother spills out to the sea of unspoken dreams, finds me in her nebulous reach, and floats away along with my grandmother's eternal sleep. So I wrote that after my grandmother passed away, and she had sort of spent the majority of her life kind of denying or sort of evading capture by not revealing her identity, which is so much, it is so relatable throughout so many parts of the world. And indigo, or this substance, is a way for me to sort of kind of keep her with me in a way, and keep that exploration going. So I organized this talk. I have a few sort of key works that I wanted to go back to, and sort of key moments in my life. I also organized this different works in terms of their astrological sign. So for instance, this survival guides feels to me like a very Leo period in my life. I think that would resonate with the artists. I'm not sure about people who are not artists necessarily and getting into astrology, but anyway, that was just a little tidbit for you. But I wanted to show something that I did when I was doing my MFA, because I know that there are MFA candidates in here, and I always appreciated when artists would bring in images or talk about their work and sort of chart their evolution to where they are now. So I thought that would be helpful. So the survival guides. So this was my thesis, and I did my graduate school at Columbia in New York. And I sort of organized this thesis around a central question, which was what would happen when the sun devours the moon? And it was the first time I was sort of grappling with, environment, material, spiritual, family. I wanted a question to be able to be answered in so many different ways. And so in this survival guides, which turned into 4 different room-sized iterations. So it was a series that I was working on from 2016 to 2019. And this is sort of the second series in it. I wanted things to sort of come out of one another. I wanted things to, relate to one another. I wanted there to be different scale shifts. I thought about this painting that I made with the two horses as this sort of codex, and everything around it could reference that painting. So for instance, these sort of burlap sacks and burlap pieces that I embroidered, could ultimately come from their saddle or something like that. I was really curious, interested in how to sort of animate a painting in that way. And I also wanted to think about the seating and how would you experience the work. There ended up being a performance component, which I don't have documentation of. That's another thing. If you do want to make art and continue to make art, documentation is so important. I cannot emphasize that enough. And so at this time, I was dealing with such a profound loss. My best friend at the time suddenly passed away. She was my collaborator. And so so she had written in her novella about these survival guides. And I just took that as a concept and transformed that concept as a way to sort of continue to collaborate with her, but in my language. So some of the texts are excerpts from her book that I posthumously published for her, which I don't have images of. But the idea of, collaborating and working with legacy, working with memory is a through line throughout my work. I don't necessarily think that it's work that I choose to do. I feel that I'm called to do this work. So I asked my mom what would happen, what would we take with us if the sun devoured the moon? So if the sun devoured the moon, I imagine that it would be so hot. It would be like planet warming. And so she came up with a list of grains, a list of seeds, a list of foods that were organized around the 5-element principle of Chinese medicine, or traditional Chinese medicine. And in traditional Chinese medicine, the 5 elements correspond to the 5 central organs. And so she organized the foods that would, strengthen certain organs. And she sent it to me in an email. And then I enlarged it, screen printed it, and then had this piece. And so this was something that would come out of this sack, was the way I was envisioning it. And so this was sort of the beginning of my work with my current work, which I'll get to, thinking about organs, thinking about the body, and thinking about healing in this way. And so these were the ultimate survival guides. There's 4 different ones, like I said. And this first one here was done in 2016, around the time my dear friend Amy died. And this was installed in an artist-run space that I ended up co-running for 4 years. So in that time, the artist-run space was sort of happening alongside my own art making. And it was a very social time. It was super community. I met so many people. We had so many artists have their first shows with us. It was just such a lively time. And I have fond memories of it, but it was also a very chaotic time. But I think having a studio practice and also having something that's social was so important to me at this time of my life. And this is the 3rd survival guide, and then this is ultimately the 4th. And between the 3rd and the 4th was when I started learning about different craft traditions throughout the world. And this is called Survival Guide Spring, and this was at the John Michael Kohler Art Center. And I was really interested in this form because I had started becoming a student of another really well-known artist, Melissa Cody, who is a 4th-generation Navajo weaver. And I had become her student and was learning how to weave in the Navajo way in her family's way. And I do want to say that, you know, I learn a lot of things from different people, but it's not oftentimes like, oh, I want to learn this, so I'm going to do this. It's often sort of a kind of case-by-case basis, like I'm her only student that she really undertook. And so it was a different way of learning that was inspiring to me and that was necessary for me at the time, having done all my sort of institutionalized schooling, formal training. I did my undergrad at UCLA, I did my grad school at Columbia, and it was, you know, a very specific way of learning art, a very conceptual way of learning art. And I wanted to do something totally out of my context. And around this time, I also met this woman who has since passed away, but I was really interested in the indigenous history of Los Angeles. And so I met this elder. Her name is Julia Bogany, and she becomes a pretty central figure in my work. She was a cultural ambassador of her tribe and worked in civic ways, worked in educational ways, and was this sort of all hands-on-deck approach. I had left my MFA, you know, I had a great experience. I had a very mixed experience, but I had left my MFA thinking that the way you navigate space in the art world is through the dominant way. There's so many ways, but the dominant way you navigate space in the art world is through credentials. And I didn't feel like that, never felt genuine to me. I never led with the fact that I had this. And so in working with Julia, the way that you navigate space with her, and her whole mission is to fight for the visibility of her tribe. The way you navigate space is to just show up. Like, it didn't matter who you were, what the color of your skin was, where you went to school, like none of that mattered. It just was about showing up and saying that you're doing the thing that you're gonna do. And for me, that was so simple, and that was just the way that I wanted to work. And so for this last survival guide, I wanted to put two disparate stories and two disparate geographies together, which was that of my grandmother and that of Julia. I don't think, you know, I don't want to compare different, you know, indigenous experiences across the world, but there are analogies that one can draw. And certainly that was something that I was trying to express in this work. And so I just wanted to give you a sense of like the amount of labor it takes to make a weaving in the Navajo way. So this is a smaller loom so on the left is a smaller loom that I constructed, and it's a smaller piece that I'm doing. And on the right, you know, you can see me going line by line, counting the warp, counting the weft as well. And so, excuse me, I'm really interested and I really value labor-intensive pieces. I think that's also something for me as a way, you know, I think having gone to school at UCLA and having gone to school at Columbia, there was so much to unlearn for me. What I wanted to say, well, I kind of lost my train of thought, but what I wanted to say was that doing something with your hands, doing something that takes a long time to do, was also a kind of resistance to the conceptual training that I received, which I also find valuable. I just think that there are other ways to make art, there are other ways to experience art, and there are other ways to bring people together. And so this was the result of the weaving video that I showed you, and this is a mythical indigo. So this indigo doesn't actually exist in the world, but it was sort of my weaving of one. And this was a painting that I made on a textile after being really inspired from my trip to China, seeing all these different kinds of textiles that different Miao villages would produce. And Miao people are really known for their exquisite embroidery, their colors, the way they dress, their silver. All these things are so integral to the culture. So this was sort of my take on that. And so that brings us to the next thing that I wanted to introduce, which was a long-term public art project that I'm working on. I was commissioned in 2021, and it will not end until 2027. And I'm designing a 2,200 square foot mosaic at the future Westwood UCLA Metro Station. And this is like a dream come true for somebody who grew up in Los Angeles. It's my love letter to the city. And it's my proposal also to the city in thinking about how we can incorporate more environmental consciousness. It's a way for me to propose how we can coexist and work with First Nations people. Los Angeles is often talked about as a city of immigrants, and it is. But it's also one of the, I think it's the hugest or the largest indigenous population in the US. So this work, this public work, is a way for me to honor that. And so in here, this is one of the 3 mosaics. So Julia had passed away. Julia, the Tongva elder that I had been working with, had passed away around this time, very suddenly. And she was also, at the time, the president of the Kurrafongna Springs, which, if you don't know what the Kurrafongna Springs is, it's a set of 2 sacred springs in West LA that sit on the campus of University High School. And it used to be, it used to supply most or all of the water to Santa Monica at some point. But what has to happen, and I'll go back to this in a second, but this is a picture of the springs. What has to happen is, because the Tongva people were only state recognized in 1994, they're state recognized, they're not federally recognized. So they have to legally, in the legal framework, they have to form a nonprofit in order to steward their land. So this is what that is. So this is the Gabrielino Springs Foundation. And that concept to me that, this is your ancestral land. You do not have a right to steward it. You have to go through all these legalities in order to take care of your land. It was so mind-blowing to me, but so standard when you think about city bureaucracy. And I was just so struck by that. And so in this image, I wanted to honor the springs. It's near UCLA. It made sense to have a site-specific project for that station. And so in here, there are 19 different California native plants. And they're all different. They're painted so that somebody who knows plants would be able to recognize them. And so the animals are also native to the California landscape. And the hawk, the red-tailed hawk, kind of starts to show up in my work as Julia's spirit. And around the time that I was painting this, so this will be transformed into a mosaic that will be 60 feet in length and 16 feet high. And around the time I was painting this, there was a return of trout in the Arroyo Seco in Pasadena, and that the trout had not been able to swim there because it's dry for many, many years. And so I wanted to put that trout in. This is the second panel. This is 60 feet by 16. Again, the water, the springs, different California native plants, different animals. And the way I paint these plants is that hiking, backpacking, going out into the field is the work. Like, it's not something that facilitates the work, it is the work itself. So in order to paint these plants, I have to go out there. I paint from life. Sometimes I would roll up these canvases and take them with me, and then paint trace their shadows out on a hike or something. It's a way for me to deepen my relationship with my environment, and that these plants are specific entities. They're not just brush. And so, yeah, that's something that I wanted to express in here. And again, it's this reach, this advocacy for intimacy. And around this time, too, I started to meet different people who would advocate for different kinds of California native plants. And the idea of like seed activism or plant advocacy became, it was a new concept for me at this time, and it was something that I continue exploring. And so this gives you a sense of scale. This is an architectural rendering of 2 of the panels. So in this station, there will be 5 artists, including myself. There will be Galaporis Kim, Yunny Min, Karen Hampton, and Moses Exball. And we each get different parts of the station. And so my mosaic will be underground. It'll be where you buy your tickets. And so you'll buy your ticket, and then from above, or you look above, and there will be my mosaic. And this idea of like going underground, seeds, planting things, or plants and planting things kind of rising above was this sort of idea that I wanted to highlight. So the recent work and work in progress on dreams, transformation, loss, the sacred, and Blue Child. So after I designed all my panels for the LA Metro, that was one of the most challenging projects that I've ever undertaken. In terms of my own labor for my artwork, but also working with a huge government bureaucracy in the second largest city in the United States that everybody's always criticizing, like, how do you get around? And so it was a learning curve, let's just say. But it made me reflect on the kind of approach and the kind of ethos that I want for my work. And what came about was that, the Metro, the government agencies, universities, institutions always function to protect any sort of liability. Like, that's their first priority. It's not about human relationships necessarily. And so what I wanted to project was my creative spirit. Like, I didn't want my creative spirit to get wrapped up in these mandates and these legalities and in this sort of like behavioral expectations. And so having something and naming something that could be mine, that could be free, that could be feral, that could be whatever I wanted it to be, was something that came about. And this figure or this spirit or this project, I'm not quite sure what to call it, is the story of Blue Child, is what I came up with. So I'm an artist for freedom. Like, I'm an artist to be free. What I mean by that is, yes, I get to do whatever I want all the time, hopefully. But what I mean is having autonomy in your decision making, having autonomy in your economic decision making, in how you relate to people, in who you work with, and how you want to work. Like, that's so important to me. It's not just about the studio practice. So Blue Child was this child that came to me after the Metro project, and I wanted to explore what that was. So I kind of made this loose story about Blue Child, which is they belong to this long-lost clan of the Blue people. And the Blue people, there's no way to identify their race, their religion, their education. There's nothing like superficially you could tell that could identify them. And the way they identify each other is through the practice of making art and telling stories. So they have this technology called storytelling that brings them together. And so they don't have a homeland, they don't have a reservation, they're also kind of all mixed with humans. So there's no like pure like blue person. And so it's obviously kind of a decolonial concept. But so Blue Child is an extension of me, and I started making all this work to kind of explore their world. And so it's not necessarily literal, like this is Blue Child's house, this is Blue Child's jacket, this is Blue Child's bed. It's their interior world, their exterior world, their spiritual world. And what ended up revealing to me was that Blue Child really was a spiritual practice that I'm after. And I remember reading Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower years ago, and the main character forms a religion, Earthseed. And I was sort of struck by how there were parallels with that. And also, of course, Octavia Butler is from Pasadena. I live in Pasadena. I'm from Pasadena. And so I was interested in this. So like there was already a kind of precedent for this. But anyway, I wanted to just make that reference. So I left the saturation. I left the hard lines. I left the collage elements. I wanted to totally break from the way I was working into another way of working. And I felt that when I finished the designs for Metro, I somehow intuitively knew that that was like an end of an era. And so I started developing different vocabulary, different ways of painting. And I feel like this is the most evolved work that I've ever made. And I ran into an undergrad earlier this week who I think is in her last year, and she was like, when do you know? Like, when do you know that you're good, that you are on your way? And I believe, if I remember correctly, my response to her was something like, you kind of never know it, you kind of just keep doing. And so this is kind of an example of that, but it took many years to get to this point where it felt like, okay, I had so many collaborations, there was so much activity in my daily life about art, artists. It was just such a full life that now I could totally just hear myself and make art from that space of knowing. So these are some paintings that came up from the last few years. And so this astrological sign would be Pisces. That marks this era. And it's ongoing. And exploring Blue Child's world is my life's work. It's essentially taking the last 10 years of research and putting it into an allegorical space so that I have more freedom to talk about it. You know, I think when I started making the work that I just talked about, it was the height of Trump's first term. It was the height of identity politics as the dominant discourse. It was a very loud space on the internet and continues to be. And I felt like the people that loved my work really got behind my work. I felt very supported in what I did. But the people that had questions always seemed to feel unsettled when I worked with other people of different cultures. And that was something that I constantly had to defend and constantly had to talk about and learn how to present, because there was just such a fear of, okay, you're Asian, you should make art about being Asian. Or like, why are you working with an indigenous elder? You're not, it's like, there was too many, it was politicized way too quickly and totally out of context without actually seeing my work and knowing what I'm doing. So bringing all that research, bring all those relationships, bring all those experiences into an allegorical space helped me feel more free to make this world possible. This is paper that I made, so I also love making paper. And this is, some behind-the-scenes photographs of paper making, literally taking plantain stalk and going to the river and washing the pulp in the river and taking a motor taxi back to the studio and laying out the paper. These types of, I found myself when I was here thinking like, oh, I could just put that pulp into the blender. Like, why do I have to, use a mortar and pestle to do this? Well, it's their way. And also, it wasn't necessarily about efficiency. It was like when you go somewhere and learn something, it can be so site-specific in a very interesting and new way. These are some natural pigments that I've made through my different hikes and walks in various parts of the world. I include them. I don't exclusively paint with natural pigments. I like to work in the kitchen. I do like to work at home. I feel most comfortable at home, but it's nice to have a studio to do large things. My home is also all completely carpeted, so. Yeah, I really wanted to start working in a more fluid and sort of watercolor-like way. I liked how things were sort of suspending in space. There was more mystery in the darkness. And around this time, I was invited to do a residency in Ecuador that was based in Quito, and it was a really important residency because it is the only independent residency in Ecuador. And the director of the residency was also an artist himself. It's also an artist-run residency. And he, over many years, had made a relationship with the Sapara community in the remote Amazon jungle in Ecuador. And the Sapara are an ethnic group that really rely on dreaming as a central tenet to organize their relationships and their communities. And so originally I was going there to learn more about dreams. I think dreams, when we pay attention to them, we can find such profound wisdom. There are so many types of dreams, and there's different ways of talking about dreams, and there's ways of dreaming together. And so for the Sapara, dreaming is a way for them to make decisions, for instance. And there are certain hierarchies within the community that dreamers, dream interpreters have. But what we ended up doing was foraging for local clay, and which is so fun. hiked into the jungle, and this was the spot. And they have different kinds of vessels that do different things. Like some vessels you only drink chicha with, some vessels you only do this with. And this was a group of me and 5 or 6 other Ecuador-based artists going to the remote jungle together. And this is Julia, who is our guide, and also a master ceramicist. And all the ceramics in the jungle are made in pit fire, or fired in a pit fire. So it's very low fire. They can break easily, but this is the way that ceramics have been used. And so in my work, I like to invite people to do things. So this is a painting with a frame shelf where the person that ends up living with this, can put little things that are important to them in these shelves. So kind of little things like that I like to do. And this was a video projection onto a slab of rammed earth that I made. Rammed earth is an ancient technology that, part of the Great Wall of China was made in rammed earth, but it's a technology that also spans geographies. And what you do is you pack earth down into layer by layer by layer. And I was really interested in that, and I'm, again, generally interested in things that appear in various parts of the world. Something like weaving, for example, backstrap weaving, the same technology that's in Guatemala is so similar to the weaving technology in Indonesia, for instance. And they seem very far apart, the places, yet their weaving technologies are similar. And I'm interested in these ways in which humans across times, across lifetimes, across space, have shared and made things in a relatable way. And so this is kind of the first time that I made an animation with my paintings, and so we'll just watch it. And it has no sound. for watching that. So that was projected onto this slab. So it was like this, when you entered the gallery, it was this glowing orb kind of vibe. More paintings. The body kind of comes in, organs come back. I started to paint organs in 2023 as a way to understand this live broadcast of what was going on in the other side of the world, seeing so much violence, and trying to understand what was, like how to relate and understand that for myself. So I started making small paintings with organs in them in an effort to sort of relate, sort of privately. I've never really spoken about that until pretty recently, but that was sort of the impetus for why the organs started to return. And you know, I had a precedent for working with organs in the past. And ceramics comes into play. So I learned how to make molds, and I'm still not that great at it. But this, for instance, is a 7-part mold. And I learned how to slip cast. I did this residency at the Kohler factory, Kohler plumbing. You might have sat on many Kohler toilets, washed your hands in many Kohler sinks, but they use porcelain slip cast as their main primary material. And so there's a residency called the Kohler Arts Industry Residency. You do not have to have much mold making experience or slip casting experience to do it, but you do work in a factory for 3 months, and you work with factory associates, and you adapt into the culture of the factory for 3 months. And so this is an ongoing piece, parts of which I'm working on here, and this is not done. This will be at a show at ICA LA next year, part of a show called Speaking in Tongues that explores creative practice as spiritual practice and vice versa. So this is part of the Blue Child world. And this is a painting that will accompany it. And I included this embroidery detail in the painting. I'm very inspired by caves. I'm very inspired by rock art, particularly Barrier Canyon style rock art, which is something me and my partner sort of stumbled upon and started to get really into. So this rock art is in like the Colorado Plateau. It is, this particular panel is in an annexed part of the Canyonlands National Park. So it's in Utah. And it's called the Great Gallery at Horseshoe Canyon. And it's about a 4-mile hike in. And along the way, there are different kinds of different panels. Barrier Canyon style is distinct in that it's only really here, and that it's, I think, about 4,000 years old. There's a lot of discussion of how old it exactly is, but it's a kind of rock art that I've never seen. And I say rock art because there is a difference between pictographs and petroglyphs. Petroglyphs are like rock carvings, pictographs are paintings. So these are technically pictographs, but both exist. And yeah, it's just, it was such an immersive experience, and I was like, wow, I want to make art like that. Like, I want somebody to come into and experience my art in such an immersive and like a captivating way. And so these are paintings like loosely inspired by the experiences that I've had in viewing rock art. And oftentimes, you know, it's not just places that you can drive up to. Sometimes you totally can drive up to them, but they take work to get to. You camp, you backpack, you know. This work is also so important in the experience for me. And so this is slip cast ceramic, and this is extremely hard to do. The factory associates kept telling me that I would never be able to do this, but here I am. And so these are 2 different molds, and one mold has 2 parts, the other mold has 3 parts. And so I brought in a devil's claw seed pod. I don't know the Latin name, but I loved the seed pod because for the certain ethnic groups and tribes in Arizona, they're used to weave baskets. But they also, the way the seed pod travels is that they hook onto the hooves of animals, or they hook onto your boot. And so I loved this way of transferring seeds. And so I wanted to make a ceramic of that. And what I did was I put it in the 3D printer, we enlarged it, and then we made a mold, and then we did many, many failed slip casts, many, many failed firings, but eventually got to this. And this, is part of this larger exploration of seeds, and it also looks so otherworldly and strange, and I really liked it. This was another barrier cannon style panel. This one you could drive up to, but it just is so amazing to me to look at. I don't have words. So these are a couple paintings that I'm working on here. And then the last section of my talk is what I'm working on now. I'm working on a collaboration with my dear friend and artist Paula Wilson, and we're working on this 56-foot long textile. And so this is the textile in 2 parts. And she is a master printer. She's an artist, way more established than I am. And we want to make art together. And so I've never worked so closely in which I've allowed another artist to work on the same substrate as I am. And that's exactly what we're doing. And so it's this other way of exploring co-authorship, collaboration, intimacy. And when we make this work, I have to go over to her studio and house in New Mexico because she has the space. She lives in a small desert town in New Mexico where the cost of living is significantly different than it is in California. And so we're eating together, we're living together, and we're making art together. And so this idea of this one organism coming together, and we're pushing out this one organism that will eventually kind of be hung on the ceiling, or hung from floor to ceiling. And it's inspired by the Egyptian god Nut, who appears in my paintings. She is thought to birth the sun. So she swallows the sun each night and births it each morning. And she's the god for the cosmos, mothers, creations, universe. And so that was sort of the departure point for this piece. And here are some images of us working on it. And so this is the mock-up. We made a little model. And then this is the gallery was so kind to install, a roll of muslin to kind of see how it would look. So that's the idea. So people would be able to view the piece from underneath. And that's why I've been dyeing indigo. This is for the back of the piece that no one will see, but still, it's so important to do that. And that's my last slide. So thank you so much for bearing with me and hearing me talk.
So I think we're going to do some Q&A, and maybe would you mind repeating back the question?
Okay.
On mic, would that be the best way to go?
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you for the question. The question was talking about the other components of the paintings outside of the organs, like the eyes, the hands. When I make a painting, I think about the painting as very alive. And if there was a diagram of me and the painting, it would be this sort of infinity loop. And so the eyes are the painting looking at me. The eyes make me feel like they're alive and that they're a being on their own. The hands are so ghostly. They're sort of just there. Sometimes they're more decorative. Sometimes they allude to a spirit. Let me go back to some of them. I often do include plants, but the plants are almost always California native plants. These profiles, they're spirits, they're figures. This is a vertebrae. This is, my idea of newt holding space. This mirroring or the symmetry started to become more of a motif for me, but I don't know exactly why. Maybe, again, that reciprocity that I was sharing about the eyes. And oftentimes they're legs that are straddling or sitting, and that alludes to a meditation practice. I don't have a strict meditation practice, but I do think the paintings require me to be very present and me to work on sections incrementally. So in that way, it is a daily ritual. I love the way you're looking at the paintings. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, originally the gills or the eye bags, I saw this lava flow that had this impression. And so I wanted to include that. And then and then I was looking at my own eyes. And then I thought that would be like a perfect place for that. But it's interesting that you say gills and underwater, because there is a study recently that came out of the University of Chicago where a paleontologist who studies ancient fish realized that fish also have dentine, and dentine was a way for them to navigate dark spaces when they couldn't rely on their eyes. So I really liked that sort of sensorial experience and wanted to sort of put that in here.
So going back to your commissions for LA Metro, I wanted to ask, were there any other pieces of Metro art that kind of inspired your process on that? I think of something like Seven Spots and a Path or High Prismatic that are like other pieces of Metro art that deal in those same themes of like kind of the explosion of colors and objects, or the native plants, or maybe like the sacred water in something like the Crying Rock in St. Monica. So I was wondering, are there any other pieces of Metro art that you look towards with thinking like, what do I do in this big public space?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The question was, are there any artworks in the Metro art collection that inspired me? And certainly High Prismatic by Pearl Shang.
Personal favorite.
Yeah, personal favorite. It's one of the most astonishing murals. The artist Pearl Shang made this vertical mural of, it's just, I almost want to go find it, but then I feel like I would reveal too much on my desktop, and gotta have some privacy. But anyway, High Prismatic Pearl Shang. Yeah.
I really appreciate when you brought up making work that
Can you define translation?
So I think when I'm thinking translation, I'm thinking about how there are words in the Latin American diaspora that aren't really translated in English. And so how then do I make works that tap into these type of these dialectical, or not dialectical, sorry, these dialects, these subaltern ways of speaking. And so wondering if translations ever present.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. I think that my work as an artist is to mine vocabulary and languages that aren't so present in our verbal discourse. That's why dreams has become sort of like one of the forefront, or so, at least so integral to my work. It's a way to reorganize or not, to familiarize oneself with a non-logical, non-linear feeling or emotional or image-based way of existing. I think as an artist, I do struggle, although I'm fine and do well at reading and writing, I do struggle with what I want to say. And I think that that is why it's an artist practice, it's an artistic practice. You do it to keep getting better at it, or you do it just to keep doing it. And so I think the vocabulary that I've been working with, you know, also is a relational expression, because the lungs can double as the ears, but in another piece they can be close together. The moths can, you know, they have different roles and functions in other paintings. So it's not always like one-to-one, whereas I do think in verbal discourse, like no means no, water bottle means water bottle. And in art, you can sort of like shuffle those letters and create different meanings. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the question was whether or not the snake has specific meaning to me. I think snakes, we were just talking about this in the morning. I think I'm drawn to symbols that are recognizable to many different kinds of people. And there's so much mythology and storytelling and symbology and meaning around snakes. But I use the snake skin, and I think that, you know, lends itself to, you know, skin shedding, transformation. I also liked painting it. Like, I liked the action of painting it. And so, and I liked how it looked visually. So some of my work is, a lot of it is formal considerations as well. Yeah, thank you for that question. I had a question. Yeah, thank you for that question. So the question was how I begin to paint, or how I approach painting. I have to be by myself generally. And one thing that a professor of mine said when I was an undergrad that I still think about every day is that making art is habit. If you cannot wait on inspiration. It's just you do it every single day. And so when you've been doing it every single day for a long time, you just kind of, you're just doing it, you know? Yeah, but there are certain like rituals that, or certain conditions, you know, for instance, like I have to have the whole day just painting. It was, for instance, today I was like, oh, I can make another plaster mold, and then I can go to my studio and paint, and then I can meet my partner at home. And it was just like, no, I can only do the plaster molds. Like the painting is another day. So there are things like that that, you know, different, when you work in different materials, the speeds and energies around those materials are so different. Yeah, the red earrings. Yeah, thank you. So the questions were if I have a favorite place to hike and whether or not we've talked about the sacred meanings of the Datura specifically. Yes, I do have a favorite place to hike, but it was, you know, the Eaton fires really devastated that area, and we lived so close to it, and it was, yeah, it really like changed the experience. The trail around JPL is still open, and it's really nice actually to be able to go there and just see so many people who have used those trail systems still, you know, go to JPL, and it's just always so diverse and so different kinds of people, different ways of using the trail. It really does feel like people kind of are holding down the fort there. And yes, we've spoken of sacred properties of Datura. There's that sort of trumpet flower also appears in other parts of the world as well, and they also have sacred properties, as you say. They have hugely hallucinogenic properties. I've never used that flower for any sort of hallucinogenic purpose. And there's a lot of knowledge that's being recuperated around this plant specifically because during colonization, a lot of these plants, a lot of these knowledge around the plants were lost. So, yeah. You had a question. Yeah, so the question was, how do I navigate spaces that I don't seem to be a part of? I think it's always a case-by-case basis, and it's a reciprocal relationship. And, you know, it's also like when you want to meet somebody, it's not always, the opportunity's not always going to be there, but sometimes the opportunities are. And those are moments of alignment. And I think in the case of Julia, for instance, it didn't matter who I was. Like what she valued was whether or not I would do the thing that I would say that I would do. And this was a very easy way to navigate that space. I think different kinds of relationships call for different things. Timing's also a really big part of it. And also like humility and being wrong, and being told no. I've never really had to encounter that, but I think the humility, the wanting to understand, like from a compassionate, from a authentic place, people can feel that, It's not too conceptual, yeah. Any last question, maybe? Yeah. Yeah, the question was the natural pigments. So I turned them into watercolors. Yeah, I have turned them into tempera before, but I didn't quite like the consistency. And the question was whether or not I use the psychedelic applications of the plant in my work. I don't think it's a reference to that lost knowledge. I think the datura flower exists in our environment, and it doesn't belong to. It's not a plant. Plants aren't exclusive to the people. So it's something that like pops up on freeways. I like that resilience, and I also think that they're so beautiful to look at. So it's not, it's not really about necessarily, in the paintings at least, it's not politicized. Okay. Yeah, I always think that nobody needs to get somebody's work right away. I also, in the past work, use a lot of color, use a lot of texture, use a lot of things that can kind of grab people's attention, or at least make them look at the work. I think a true understanding of an artist's work is through time. I don't think you fully understand an artist's work by just one painting or one piece of work or one exhibition. So in terms of personal narrative, sometimes that's going to interest people, sometimes that's not. Sometimes the formal applications of my work is more interesting to people, sometimes that's not. So it's not necessarily something I'm totally worried about. I also think writing is a good tool as well. I don't subscribe to the thought that you should just look at a painting and see, or look at a work and that work should tell you everything. I do think writing can have a function in the experience of artwork. So I have leaned on that, for instance, talking about indigo. But that's if somebody wanted to do more research on my work, that's available. But most people are not going to be in a gallery and reading that. But yeah, thank you. Sorry to cut off the question.
Yeah. I just want to make sure to invite everybody to Iris's Open Studio, November 21st. It's a Friday. It'll be from 12 to 2 at the VAF main gallery. Amy, do you have any announcements or anything?
to thank you very much for coming to Viz 80. So thank you so much for joining us today and for your wonderful, amazing talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.